The crackling flames devoured everything she had ever known, and Martha Morrison could only stand frozen in the dusty street with her 3-year-old daughter's hand clutched in hers, watching orange tongues lick skyward into the black Arizona night. The general store that had been her livelihood, her home, her husband's legacy, collapsed inward with a roar that sent sparks spiraling toward the stars like desperate prayers. Owen Jefferson had been riding back from checking his cattle when he saw the glow against the horizon, that terrible orange bloom that made every rancher's blood run cold. He kicked his horse into a gallop, racing toward Gila Bend with his heart hammering against his ribs. The town was small, barely 24 buildings scattered along the trail, and fire could take it all in an hour if the wind picked up. When he thundered into the main street, he saw folks forming a bucket brigade from the well, but the store was already lost. What caught his attention was the woman standing motionless, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, her nightdress covered by a hastily thrown shawl, and a little girl pressed against her legs. Owen swung down from his horse and ran to them. The heat was intense even from 30 feet away, and embers were starting to drift toward the neighboring buildings. He grabbed the woman's arm, and she turned to him with eyes that seemed to see right through him, wide and glazed with shock. "Madam, you need to move back," he said, having to raise his voice over the fire's roar. She did not respond, just stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. The little girl began to cry, hiding her face in her mother's skirts. Without thinking twice, Owen scooped the child up into his arms. She was light as a feather, her small body trembling. He looked at the woman, whose eyes finally focused on him when she realized he held her daughter. "Come on," he said more gently. "There's nothing you can do here. Your girl needs you." That broke through. Martha blinked, and he saw awareness flood back into her green eyes, followed immediately by anguish so raw it made his chest ache. She nodded once, and let him guide her away from the inferno, away from the crowd, to the far end of the street where the night air was cooler and cleaner. He set the little girl down carefully, but she immediately reached up for him again, so he lifted her back up, feeling her wet cheeks against his neck. Martha stood with her arms wrapped around herself, shaking despite the warm September night. She was younger than he had first thought, maybe 25 or 26, with delicate features and skin that had probably once been pale but was now tanned from the desert sun. Her nightdress was thin, and he realized she was likely wearing everything she now owned in the world. "Do you have family here?" Owen asked. "Somewhere to go tonight?" She shook her head slowly, her eyes drifting back to the fire. Most of the townspeople were still fighting to keep it from spreading, and they had been successful so far. The buildings on either side of the store were getting drenched with bucket after bucket of precious water, and the flames seemed to be contained to the one structure. Small mercy. "My husband died last winter," Martha said, her voice hoarse and distant. "Pneumonia. It was just us. Just me and Sarah." She looked at her daughter in Owen's arms, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Everything was in there. Everything. Owen shifted the little girl's weight. Sarah had stopped crying and was watching her mother with solemn brown eyes, one tiny fist clutching his shirt collar. He felt a fierce protective surge he did not fully understand. He had seen plenty of hardship in his 32 years, had faced down rustlers and survived a nearly fatal bullet wound and buried his own father. But something about this woman's quiet devastation, and this child's trust, cut right through his usual reserve. "You still have us," he heard himself say. The words came out before he could think them through, but once they were spoken, he knew he meant them. "You've got people here. You're not alone." Martha's eyes met his, and for a moment, They just looked at each other while the fire crackled and the townspeople shouted and the night pressed in around them. Something passed between them in that look, some wordless acknowledgement that this moment would matter, though neither of them could have said why. "I don't even know you," Martha whispered. "Owen Jefferson," he said. "I run cattle east of town, and you're Martha Morrison. I've bought supplies from your store." She nodded slowly, recognition dawning. "You always pay fair and never haggle. My mama raised me right." He managed a small smile, trying to ease the moment. Sarah yawned hugely against his shoulder, and he felt her body start to relax into sleep despite everything. "This little one's exhausted. Let me take you both to Mrs. Chen's boarding house. She'll have a room." "I can't pay," Martha said, and he heard shame creep into her voice. "Don't worry about that right now." Owen started walking, and after a moment's hesitation, Martha followed. They moved through the darkness toward the boarding house at the opposite end of town, leaving the fire and the chaos behind. With each step, Owen felt the weight of what he had just committed to, but he did not regret it. His ranch was not fancy, but it was profitable, and he had money saved. More importantly, he had been lonely for longer than he cared to admit, rattling around his house with only his foreman and the occasional cowhand for company. Mrs. Chen was a practical woman who had come to Arizona from California 15 years ago and never saw fit to leave. She took one look at Martha's face and Sarah's sleeping form in Owen's arms and asked no questions, just showed them to a small room on the second floor. The room was clean and plain, with a bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out on the desert. "I'll bring up some things, Mrs. Chen said quietly. "Clothes and such. We're about the same size, Mrs. Morrison." "Thank you," Martha managed, her voice breaking on the words. Owen laid Sarah gently on the bed. The little girl did not wake, just curled onto her side with her thumb creeping toward her mouth. He straightened and found Martha watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. "You don't owe us anything." Owen considered the question. In the dim lamplight, Martha looked impossibly fragile and impossibly strong all at once, and he realized he was already half lost to something he had not felt in years, maybe never. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I meant what I said. You're not alone." He left before she could respond, tipping his hat to Mrs. Chen on his way out. The night air felt cool after the closeness of the boarding house, and he stood in the street for a moment, looking back toward the fire. It was dying now, mostly contained, just the skeleton of the building still burning. Tomorrow, people would sift through the ashes and talk about what had started it. Tonight, though, a woman and child were safe, and Owen found that mattered more to him than it probably should have. He rode back to his ranch slowly, letting his horse pick the pace, and tried not to think too hard about the way Martha's eyes had looked in the firelight, or the trust Sarah had shown by falling asleep against his shoulder. He had work to do in the morning, cattle to move to better grazing, fences to check. Life went on, even after disasters. But sleep came hard that night, and when it did, his dreams were full of green eyes and flames and a small hand gripping his shirt. The next morning, Owen was up before dawn as usual, but his thoughts kept drifting back to town as he went through his chores. His foreman, a weathered man named Pete who had worked the ranch since Owen's father's time, noticed his distraction. "Something on your mind, boss?" Pete asked as they saddled horses in the pre-dawn gloom. "Fire in town last night," Owen said. "Morrison's store burned down. The widow and her daughter lost everything." Pete whistled low. "That's a hard blow. She was already struggling after her husband passed, from what I heard." Owen nodded, tightening his cinch perhaps more forcefully than necessary. "I'm going into town this afternoon. See if there's anything to be done. Pete gave him a knowing look but did not comment, which Owen appreciated. They rode out to check the herd, and the morning passed in the familiar rhythm of ranch work. The sun climbed high and hot, turning the desert landscape into shimmering gold and red. Owen's land stretched for miles, scrub brush and scattered cottonwoods along the seasonal creek bed, mountains rising purple in the distance. It was harsh country but beautiful in its way, and it had been his whole life. After lunch, he washed up and changed into a clean shirt, then rode back into Gila Bend. The town looked different in daylight, smaller and more worn. The burned remains of the store stood like a blackened tooth in the middle of the street, still smoking faintly. A few men were poking through the rubble, salvaging what little might be saved. Owen dismounted and joined them. "Find anything?" he asked Jack Porter, who ran the saloon. "Not much," Jack said, wiping soot from his forehead. "Some metal goods, a few coins that were in the cash box." The heat was too intense. Nothing wooden or fabric survived. Owen looked at the destruction and felt anger kindle in his gut. "Anyone know how it started?" "Martha says she woke up to smoke," Jack replied. "Fire was already going strong in the store part of the building. She barely got Sarah out." He shook his head. "Could have been a lamp. Could have been someone's cigarette thrown wrong earlier in the day and smoldering. We'll probably never know." Owen helped them work for another hour, then headed to the boarding house. "Mrs. Chen answered his knock and smiled knowingly when he asked after Martha. "She's in her room. Been there all morning, mostly. I brought her breakfast, but she barely touched it. The little one ate, though." Mrs. Chen leaned closer, lowering her voice. "She's in shock still, Mr. Jefferson. Going to take time for it all to settle in. Could I see her? I'll ask." Mrs. Chen disappeared upstairs and returned a moment later, gesturing for him to follow. She knocked on Martha's door and called out, "Mr. Jefferson is here to see you, dear." The door opened, and Martha stood there in a borrowed dress of plain brown cotton, her hair braided over one shoulder. She looked exhausted, with purple shadows under her eyes, but she managed a small smile when she saw him. "Mr. Jefferson, you didn't have to come back." "Wanted to check on you and Sarah," Owen said, suddenly feeling awkward. He held out a small bundle. "Brought some things. Clothes for the little one. My foreman's daughter outgrew them and he's been saving them for his next grandchild, but I figured you could use them now." Martha took the bundle with trembling hands and her eyes filled with tears. "You're very kind. Too kind. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Don't worry about that." Owen glanced past her and saw Sarah sitting on the floor, playing with a rag doll that Mrs. Chen must have found for her. The girl looked up when she heard his voice and smiled, which did something strange to his heart. "How are you both holding up?" Martha stepped back, inviting him in. The room was small and he felt oversized in it, his hat in his hands, his boots loud on the wooden floor. Martha sat on the edge of the bed and he took the single chair, turning it to face her. "I don't know what to do," Martha admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have nothing. No inventory to sell, no building to sell it from. The land the store was on was leased, so that's no help. I have maybe $30 to my name, and that won't last long even at Mrs. Chen's rates." She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "I keep thinking I should feel more. I should be crying or screaming or something, but I just feel numb." Owen leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Shock does that. You'll feel it all eventually, but right now, your mind is protecting you so you can take care of Sarah. That's what matters most. You sound like you've experienced loss. My mother when I was 12. My father 3 years ago. My older brother to cholera the year before that." Owen shrugged. "Loss is part of living, I suppose. Doesn't make it easier, but you learn to carry it." Martha looked at him with those penetrating green eyes, and he felt seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and compelling. "You're not what I expected," she said softly. "What did you expect? Most ranchers who come into town are rough, loud. They drink and gamble and sometimes cause trouble. But you're different, quiet, thoughtful." A faint color rose in her cheeks. "I noticed before, when you'd come into the store." Owen felt his own face heat. "I noticed you too," he admitted. "Thought about asking if I could call on you properly, but it seemed too soon after your husband's passing." The air between them shifted, became charged with awareness. Sarah made a sound, and they both looked at her, the moment breaking. The little girl was standing now, walking toward Owen with her doll clutched in one hand. "Up," she said simply, raising her arms. Owen glanced at Martha, who nodded, and he lifted Sarah onto his knee. She settled there like she belonged, leaning against his chest, and showed him her doll with great seriousness. "This is Molly," Sarah informed him in her piping voice. "She got scared of the fire too, but Mama said we're safe now." "Your Mama's right," Owen said gently. "You're both safe, and Molly too." Sarah nodded, satisfied, and went back to playing with the doll while sitting on his leg. Owen met Martha's eyes over her daughter's head and saw something there that made his breath catch. Hope, maybe, or possibility. "I have an idea," Owen said carefully, "and I want you to hear me out before you say no." Martha's expression grew wary. "All right. My ranch house is big. Too big for just me, honestly. There's a whole section that was meant to be for family, for children, that just sits empty. You and Sarah could stay there. You'd have privacy, your own rooms, and there's work you could do if you wanted. Cooking, mending, keeping the house. I'd pay you fair wages, same as I'd pay any housekeeper." "Mr. Jefferson, I can't—" "Hear me out," he interrupted gently. "I know how it sounds, but think about it practically. You need somewhere to stay and a way to earn money. I need help at the ranch. Pete does his best, but he's getting older and the house is a bachelor's mess half the time. It would be a business arrangement." "And what would people say?" Martha asked, but he could hear that she was considering it. "People talk no matter what you do, but Mrs. Chen could come out and visit, see that everything is proper. You'd have your own space, like I said. And Sarah would have room to run around, fresh air, good food." He paused. "It would just be until you get back on your feet, however long that takes." Martha was quiet for a long moment, absently stroking Sarah's hair. Owen waited, his heart beating harder than it should have been. He knew he was offering more than just a job, even if he had not put it into words. He was offering a chance for something else, something neither of them was quite ready to name yet. "Why are you really doing this?" Martha asked finally, looking up at him. Owen decided to be honest. "Because I can, because it's right. And because I'd like to get to know you better if you're willing. No pressure, no expectations. Just a chance." Sarah yawned and curled more firmly against Owen's chest, apparently ready for a nap. Martha watched her daughter with soft eyes, and Owen saw the moment she made her decision. "All right," Martha said quietly. "We'll come to your ranch for now, until I can figure out something else." Relief flooded through Owen so strongly he almost smiled. "Good. That's good. We can head out whenever you're ready, today, tomorrow, you just say the word." "Tomorrow," Martha decided. "That will give me time to prepare Sarah, to explain that we're going somewhere new. Tomorrow, then." Owen carefully stood, transferring Sarah to her mother's arms. The little girl mumbled sleepily but did not wake. "I'll come by mid-morning with the wagon. Bring anything Mrs. Chen can spare for you." Martha stood as well, Sarah's head on her shoulder. She walked Owen to the door, and for a moment they stood close in the narrow doorway. Owen could smell lavender, probably from soap Mrs. Chen had provided, and see the fine lines at the corners of Martha's eyes. "Thank you," Martha said softly, "for everything. For last night, for today, for this chance. I won't forget it." "You don't have to thank me," Owen replied. "Just let me help, That's all I ask." He left before the moment could stretch into something more, heading back down the stairs and out into the bright afternoon. His horse was waiting patiently at the hitching post, and Owen mounted up, feeling lighter than he had in months, maybe years. The ride back to the ranch seemed shorter, and when he arrived, Pete took one look at his face and grinned. "So how's the widow?" Pete asked innocently. "She and her daughter are coming to stay at the ranch," Owen said, dismounting. "They'll need the east wing prepared. Fresh linens, a good cleaning, firewood stocked." Pete's eyebrows rose. "That's so. Moving pretty fast, aren't you, boss?" "It's a business arrangement," Owen said firmly, though he could feel heat in his face. "She needs work, I need help, that's all." "Sure it is." Pete's grin widened. "I'll get the rooms ready. Might be nice to have a woman's touch around here again, and a child's laughter. Place has been too quiet since your ma passed." Owen could not argue with that. The ranch had been his family's legacy, built by his grandfather and expanded by his father, but it had felt like just a place to work and sleep for too long. Maybe Martha and Sarah would bring some life back to it. And maybe, if he was lucky and did not rush things, they might stay longer than either of them expected. That night, Owen found himself preparing for their arrival with more care than he would have thought possible. He cleaned the main rooms of the house until they gleamed, dusted furniture that had not been touched in months, and even picked wildflowers to put in a vase on the kitchen table. Pete watched all this with undisguised amusement but helped without comment, and by the time they were done, the house looked more like a home than it had in years. Owen barely slept, his mind racing with plans and hopes and worries. What if Martha hated the isolation of the ranch? What if Sarah was frightened of the cattle or the horses? What if this whole thing was a terrible mistake that would make everything worse? But when morning came, and he hitched up the wagon to head into town, his doubts faded. This felt right in a way that bypassed logic, and Owen had learned to trust his instincts. They had kept him alive through droughts and storms and the occasional close call with dangerous men. They would not steer him wrong now. Mrs. Chen had packed up what little Martha and Sarah had, which amounted to a single carpetbag of borrowed clothes and a few toys for Sarah. Martha wore the same brown dress from yesterday, and Sarah was in a little blue pinafore that was slightly too large. They both looked nervous, standing on the boarding house porch with Mrs. Chen fussing over them. "You send word if you need anything," Mrs. Chen told Martha, gripping her hands. "Anything at all. Mr. Jefferson is a good man, but you let me know if that changes." "I will," Martha promised, hugging the older woman. "Thank you for everything." Owen helped them into the wagon, lifting Sarah up first and then offering Martha his hand. Her fingers were slender and calloused from work, and they trembled slightly in his grip. He wanted to squeeze reassuringly, but settled for a smile instead. The ride to the ranch took about 40 minutes, following a well-worn trail east into the scrubland. Sarah sat between them, her head swiveling back and forth to take in everything, asking questions in a steady stream that made Owen smile. "What are those?" she asked, pointing at a pair of hawks circling overhead. "Red-tailed hawks," Owen told her. "They're hunting for rabbits and mice." "Do you have rabbits?" "Plenty of them. And lizards and snakes and sometimes coyotes, though they usually stay away from the house." Sarah's eyes went wide. "Snakes? Mostly harmless ones," Owen assured her. "But if you see a snake, you tell your mama or me right away and we'll make sure it's safe." "Deal." "Deal," Sarah agreed solemnly. Martha was quieter, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze on the landscape rolling past. Owen wondered what she was thinking but did not press. She would talk when she was ready. When the ranch came into view, nestled in a small valley with cottonwoods marking the creek and corrals spreading out behind the house, Owen felt a surge of pride. It was not much compared to some of the bigger spreads farther north, but it was his, built with his family's sweat and blood, and it had weathered every hardship the desert could throw at it. "It's beautiful," Martha said softly, and Owen glanced at her in surprise. She was smiling, really smiling for the first time since the fire. "It looks solid, permanent, like it belongs here." "That's exactly what my grandfather said when he first saw this spot," Owen replied. "Said it felt like home before he even broke ground." He pulled the wagon up to the front of the house, a low adobe structure with a covered porch and thick walls to keep out the heat. Pete came out to greet them, doffing his hat to Martha and bending down to Sarah's level. "Well, hello there, little miss," Pete said kindly. "I'm Pete. I work for your mama's new boss, which I guess makes us friends." Sarah regarded him seriously. "Do you have any horses?" "About a dozen of them." "Would you like to see?" Sarah looked to Martha for permission, and after a moment, Martha nodded. Pete offered Sarah his hand, and she took it without hesitation, letting him lead her toward the corrals. Owen watched them go, then turned to help Martha down from the wagon. "He's good with children," Owen said. "Had 5 of his own, though they are all grown now." "Sarah doesn't usually take to strangers that quickly," Martha said, sounding bemused. "She must feel safe here. That's the idea." Owen picked up the carpet bag and gestured toward the house. "Come on, let me show you around." The inside of the house was cool and dim after the bright sunlight, and Martha paused in the entryway, looking around with evident curiosity. The main room was large, with a stone fireplace at one end and simple but sturdy furniture arranged for both work and comfort. A hallway led deeper into the house, and Owen led her that way. "My room is there," he said, pointing to a door on the left. "Pete has a cabin out by the barn, so it's just me in the house most of the time. These rooms here." He opened a door to reveal a sunny bedroom with a large bed, a wardrobe, and a washstand. "This would be yours. And this one, another door to a smaller room clearly meant for a child with a little bed and a window overlooking the corrals. For Sarah." Martha walked through the room slowly, touching the furniture lightly, her expression unreadable. Owen waited, tension coiling in his shoulders. Finally, she turned to him. "It's wonderful," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "More than I could have hoped for. Thank you, Owen, truly." It was the first time she had used his given name, and hearing it in her soft voice made something warm unfold in his chest. "I'm glad it suits you. Make yourself at home. Change anything you want. These rooms are yours for as long as you need them." Martha nodded, blinking rapidly. "I should check on Sarah." They went back outside together and found Sarah in the corral with Pete, standing on the bottom rail to pet a gentle mare's nose. The little girl was laughing, her earlier nervousness completely forgotten, and Martha's face softened as she watched. "She's happy," Martha murmured almost to herself. "I wasn't sure she would be after everything, but she's happy." "Children are resilient," Owen said. "Stronger than we give them credit for. So are women," Martha replied, turning to look at him. "At least I'm going to try to be." Their eyes met and held, and Owen felt that connection again, that sense of something shifting and aligning. He wanted to say more, to tell her that she was already stronger than she knew, that he admired her courage and her grace under impossible circumstances. But the words caught in his throat, and the moment passed as Sarah called out for her mother to come see the horses. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of settling in. Martha unpacked their meager belongings, and then joined Owen in the kitchen to prepare dinner. They worked side by side, falling into an easy rhythm that surprised them both. Martha made biscuits while Owen fried up steaks from a recent butchering, and they talked about small things, safe things, learning each other's rhythms. Sarah played nearby, chattering to her doll and occasionally running to show them a rock or a leaf she had found. Pete joined them for dinner, and the meal was lively and warm in a way Owen's table had not been in years. He caught himself smiling more than once, caught Pete's knowing glances, and did not even mind. After dinner, Martha put Sarah to bed while Owen and Pete cleaned up. The older man waited until they were alone to speak. "She's good for you," Pete said quietly. "Both of them are. Can see it already." Owen dried a plate carefully. "It's only been one day." "Sometimes one day is all it takes to know." Pete hung up his towel. "Your ma always said you'd know the right woman when you met her. Said you were like your grandfather that way." He took one look at your grandma and told his friends he'd just met his wife. "That's just a story." "Maybe. But here you are with a widow and her child under your roof, and you're happier than I've seen you in 3 years. Make of that what you will." Pete clapped him on the shoulder and headed out to his cabin, leaving Owen alone with his thoughts. Martha came back into the kitchen a few minutes later, moving quietly. "She went right to sleep. I think the fresh air tired her out." "It's good country for children," Owen said. "Lots of space to run and explore." "And snakes," Martha added with a small smile. "I'll teach her what to watch for. And you too, if you'd like." "I'd like that." Martha poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot still warm on the stove and leaned against the counter, cradling the mug in both hands. "Owen, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why haven't you married?" "A man like you, with a ranch and a steady income, I'd think you'd have had your pick of women." Owen considered his answer carefully. "I've been busy, I suppose, building the ranch, taking care of my father before he passed, and I guess I was waiting for something that felt right. Most of the women I've met were either only interested in the ranch or wanted to change everything about my life. I didn't want that." "What did you want?" "A partner," Owen said simply. "Someone who could stand beside me, not behind me or in front of me. Someone who understood that life out here is hard but worth it. Someone I could talk to at the end of the day and laugh with and build something with." He looked at her directly. "Someone like you." Martha's breath caught and color flooded her cheeks. She set down her coffee cup with a hand that was not quite steady. "Owen, I'm not ready for, I know," he interrupted gently. "And I'm not asking for anything right now except a chance. Let's just see what happens, Martha. No pressure, no expectations. Just time." She searched his face and he let her look, let her see whatever she needed to see. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Time," she agreed softly. "I can do that." They said their goodnights not long after, and Owen lay in his bed listening to the sounds of the house settling. The faint creak of floorboards as Martha moved around her room, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods outside. He felt more content than he had in longer than he could remember, and sleep came easily. The days that followed fell into a pattern that felt natural from the start. Owen rose early to work with Pete, and the hands he hired seasonally, checking cattle and mending fences, and doing the 1,000 small tasks that kept a ranch running. Martha took over the household with quiet efficiency, cooking meals that made even Pete's eyes light up, mending clothes that had languished in Owen's repair basket for months, and turning the house into a true home with small touches like curtains on the windows and flowers on the table. Sarah followed Owen around whenever he was near the house, asking endless questions and begging for rides on the gentle horses. He found himself looking forward to those moments, teaching her how to curry a horse properly or pointing out animal tracks in the dust. She was bright and curious and fearless, and he adored her. More than that, though, he found himself falling deeper for Martha with each passing day. She sang while she worked, old hymns and folk songs that filled the house with sweetness. She laughed at his jokes and challenged his opinions at dinner, and looked at him sometimes with an expression that made his heart race. But she also kept a careful distance, never letting their hands touch for more than a moment, always retiring to her room early in the evening. Owen respected her boundaries, but it was not always easy, especially on the warm October evening 3 weeks after she had arrived, when he came in from a long day to find her on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Sarah asleep?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her, finally. She was so excited about the new kittens in the barn that she could barely settle down. Martha smiled. "Thank you for showing them to her. My pleasure. She's a good kid." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Owen let himself simply exist in the moment, the evening air cooling his sun-heated skin, the woman he was falling for at his side. Finally, Martha spoke. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about what comes next for us, Sarah and me." Owen's stomach clenched. "You're leaving?" "No." Martha turned to look at him, and her expression was complicated. "That's just it. I don't want to leave. I like it here. Sarah loves it here. And she paused, then continued more softly. And I find myself thinking about staying permanently. If you'd have us. If I'd have you," Owen repeated, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Martha, I'd give anything for you to stay, both of you. I thought you knew that." "I wanted to be sure that I wasn't just running from my grief or my fear. Sure that what I'm starting to feel for you is real." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Because I am starting to feel something, Owen. Something I didn't think I'd ever feel again." Owen reached over slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her fingers curled around his, and the simple contact sent warmth flooding through him. "I'm falling in love with you," he said, the words coming out rough but honest. "Have been since I saw you standing in the street that night, so brave and so broken. I want you to stay, Martha. Not as my housekeeper, as my wife, if you'll have me." Martha's eyes widened, and he saw tears glimmer in them. "Owen, are you certain? We've only known each other a few weeks. I'm certain, more certain than I've been about anything in my life." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I'm not asking for an answer right now. I just wanted you to know where I stand. Take all the time you need to figure out how you feel." "I already know how I feel," Martha said, and her voice was shaking. "I'm falling in love with you too. It terrifies me. I lost Richard, and it nearly destroyed me. The thought of opening myself up to that kind of pain again," she broke off, swallowing hard. "Love is always a risk," Owen said quietly, "but so is being alone. And I promise you, Martha, I will do everything in my power to make you happy and to keep you and Sarah safe. I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, but I can promise I'll face it beside you." A tear slipped down Martha's cheek, and Owen reached up with his free hand to wipe it away gently. She leaned into the touch, closing her eyes, and he felt her trembling. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Joy burst through Owen like sunrise, brilliant and overwhelming. He stood and pulled Martha to her feet, cupping her face in his hands. "You mean it?" "I mean it." Martha was smiling through her tears now. "You're a good man, Owen Jefferson, the best man I've ever known. And if you're fool enough to want a widow with a child and no dowry, then I'm saying yes before you come to your senses." Owen laughed. The sound startled out of him, and then he kissed her. It was soft and careful and full of promise, and Martha melted against him with a small sound that made his heart stutter. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "We'll do this right," he said. "A proper wedding. I'll talk to the circuit preacher next time he comes through, or we can go into Tucson if you want something bigger." "Here is fine," Martha said. "With the people who matter. That's all I need." They stood together on the porch as the stars came out, holding each other, and Owen felt a peace settle into his bones that he had been searching for without knowing it. This was what he had been waiting for. This woman, this moment, this future spreading out before them full of possibility. The next weeks were a flurry of preparation. Word spread quickly through the small community around Gila Bend that Owen Jefferson was getting married, and people reacted with universal approval. Mrs. Chen came out to the ranch bearing gifts and good wishes, and to Martha's relief, pronounced everything entirely proper. Other neighbors stopped by with food and offers of help, and Owen realized anew how much goodwill he had built up over the years of being a fair and honest neighbor. Sarah, when told that Owen was going to be her new father, threw herself at him with such enthusiasm that she nearly knocked him over. "Does this mean I can call you Papa?" she asked eagerly. Owen looked at Martha, who nodded with shining eyes, and then back at Sarah. "I'd like that very much," he said, his voice thick. "Papa," Sarah tested the word, then grinned. "Papa, Papa, Papa, can we go see the horses, Papa?" And just like that, Owen had a daughter. It felt right and natural and terrifying all at once, but he embraced it fully, knowing that this little girl had claimed just as much of his heart as her mother. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in November, a month after Martha and Sarah had come to live at the ranch. The circuit preacher arrived on Friday, a jovial man named Reverend Thomas, who had been traveling between small Arizona communities for 20 years. He stayed overnight at the ranch and spent the evening getting to know Owen and Martha, clearly pleased by what he saw. "It's good to see love bloom even from tragedy," Reverend Thomas said over dinner. "God works in mysterious ways." The wedding day dawned clear and cool, perfect autumn weather. Martha wore a dress that Mrs. Chen and several other women had sewn together from donated fabric, a simple but elegant creation in pale blue that made her eyes luminous. Sarah wore a matching dress in miniature and carried a bouquet of wildflowers, her face solemn with the importance of her role. The ceremony was held in the ranch yard, under the cottonwoods by the creek. About 30 people came, everyone from the area who could make it, and Pete stood up as Owen's best man while Mrs. Chen stood with Martha. Sarah stayed close to her mother, clutching her flowers and watching everything with wide eyes. When Reverend Thomas asked if Owen would take Martha as his wife, Owen's voice rang out clear and strong. "I will." And when Martha promised to love and honor Owen, her voice was steady despite the tears streaming down her face. They exchanged simple gold bands that Owen had ridden into Tucson to purchase, and when Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife, Owen pulled Martha close and kissed her to the sound of cheering and applause. Sarah tugged on his pants leg, and he scooped her up so she could be part of the embrace, the three of them forming a family in that moment. The celebration afterwards was filled with food and laughter and music provided by a neighbor with a fiddle. Owen danced with his new wife, holding her close and marveling at how his life had changed in just 6 weeks. Martha's eyes shone as she looked up at him, and he knew she was thinking the same thing. "Happy?" he asked, spinning her gently. "Happier than I thought possible," Martha replied. "Thank you, Owen, for giving us a home, a family." "Thank you for saying yes," Owen countered, "for taking a chance on a lonely rancher." They danced until the stars came out, and then the guests began to drift away, heading home with promises to visit soon. Pete had tactfully taken Sarah to his cabin for the night, giving the newlyweds privacy, and as the last wagon pulled away, Owen and Martha found themselves alone. They went inside together, suddenly shy with each other despite everything. Owen lit lamps while Martha checked that everything was tidy, both of them moving carefully. Finally, Owen caught her hand and pulled her close. "I love you," he said simply. "I'll say it every day for the rest of our lives if you'll let me." "I love you too," Martha whispered. And then there were no more words necessary, just the two of them learning each other in the soft lamplight, becoming husband and wife in truth. The winter that followed was the happiest Owen had ever known. Martha settled into her role as his wife with a grace that humbled him, managing the household and starting to make plans for expanding the ranch house in the spring. Sarah thrived in the desert air, growing taller and more confident, her laughter a constant presence around the ranch. Owen threw himself into his work with renewed energy, knowing that everything he built was for his family now. He and Pete made plans to increase the herd in the spring, to dig a new well closer to the eastern pastures, to build a proper schoolroom addition to the house, since the nearest school was too far for Sarah to attend. Christmas came, and Owen surprised Martha and Sarah with gifts he had been secretly working on for weeks. A new doll for Sarah, hand-carved and painted with meticulous care. A music box for Martha, something beautiful and frivolous that made her cry happy tears when she opened it. "You didn't have to do this," Martha said, but her smile was radiant. "I wanted to," Owen replied. "You've both given me more than I ever dreamed of. This is just a small thank you." That night, after Sarah was asleep, Martha told Owen that she was expecting a baby. The news stunned him into momentary silence, and then he swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby," he kept repeating, wonder in his voice. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Martha asked, though she could clearly see the answer on his face. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it." Owen set her down gently, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach. "When? Summer, I think, July or August." Martha covered his hands with hers. "Sarah's excited. I told her this morning, and she wants a baby brother." "Brother or sister doesn't matter to me," Owen said. "Just as long as you're both healthy." The months passed in a blur of preparation. Martha bloomed with pregnancy, her face glowing, and Owen found himself even more protective than before, trying to keep her from working too hard. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, pointing out that she had done this before and knew her limits. Sarah helped prepare the nursery, painting wobbly flowers on the walls under Martha's supervision, and helping Owen assemble the cradle he was building. She talked constantly about the baby, making plans and asking questions that made both her parents laugh. In late April, tragedy struck when a neighboring ranch was hit by raiders, and 3 men were killed. The incident shook the whole community, reminding everyone that the territory was still dangerous despite the veneer of civilization. Owen increased security around his own ranch, hiring an extra hand and making sure firearms were always close at hand. "I won't let anything happen to you," he told Martha fiercely when she expressed concern. "Not now, not ever." "I know," Martha said, touching his face gently. "I trust you." The raiders were caught by the cavalry from Fort Yuma before they could strike again, and the community breathed easier. But the incident had reminded Martha forcefully of how fragile safety could be, and she found herself thinking often of the night her store had burned, of Owen appearing out of the darkness like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come to town that night?" she asked Owen one evening as they sat on the porch, watching Sarah chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. "Every day," Owen admitted. "But then I remember that I did come, that I found you. And I think maybe that's how it was always meant to be. You believe in fate. I believe some things are meant to happen." He took her hand, threading their fingers together. "Like us." Martha leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the baby move inside her and watching her daughter play, and thinking that this was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of hardship or fear, but the presence of love strong enough to face anything. The baby came on a sweltering August afternoon, arriving with lusty cries that announced a healthy set of lungs. Owen paced anxiously outside the bedroom while Mrs. Chen attended Martha, with Sarah sitting on the porch steps refusing to be sent away. When Mrs. Chen finally opened the door and beckoned him in, Owen's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. Martha lay exhausted against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat, but smiling as she held a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Owen approached on shaking legs and looked down at the tiny red face, the miniature hands waving aimlessly. Awe crashed over him like a wave, stealing his breath and his words. "He's perfect," Owen finally managed. "You're both perfect. What should we name him?" Martha asked. "We talked about several, but nothing felt quite right." Owen thought for a moment, then said, "How about James, after my father? He would have loved to meet his grandson." "James Jefferson," Martha tested the name. "I like it, Jamie for short." Sarah was allowed in shortly after, and she approached the baby with wide eyes and tentative steps. Owen lifted her carefully so she could see her new brother, and Sarah stared at the tiny creature with fascination. "He's so small," she whispered. "Can I hold him?" With Martha and Owen's careful supervision, Sarah held baby Jamie for the first time, her face a study in concentration and delight. "Hi, Jamie," she said softly. "I'm your big sister. I'm going to teach you everything." The sight of his daughter holding his son, while his wife looked on with such love, made Owen's eyes burn with tears he did not bother to hide. This was his family, his whole world, and he would protect it with everything he had. The months after Jamie's birth were exhausting but joyful. Martha recovered quickly and threw herself into caring for the baby while still managing the household with Sarah's eager help. Owen found himself waking in the night to the sound of crying and stumbling to the nursery to find Martha already there, rocking Jamie and singing softly. He would stand in the doorway, watching them, and marvel at how much his life had changed. Sarah adapted to being a big sister with enthusiasm, always wanting to help with the baby. She would bring Martha diapers and blankets, would sing to Jamie when he fussed, and would report his every movement and sound with great importance. It was clear she adored her baby brother, and Jamie seemed to recognize her voice even from the first weeks, turning his head toward her when she spoke. As fall arrived and the brutal summer heat finally broke, Owen made good on his promise to expand the house. He and Pete and two hired hands spent weeks building the schoolroom addition, creating a bright space with big windows and shelves for books. Martha was thrilled, and immediately began planning lessons for Sarah, and eventually, for Jamie and any other children who might come along. "Any other children?" Owen teased when she mentioned it. "Planning on a big family, are we?" Martha blushed but smiled. "Maybe, if you're willing." "I'm willing," Owen said, pulling her close despite the baby in her arms and Sarah tugging on his leg. "As many as you want, as long as you're healthy and happy." That winter was harder than the one before, with heavy rains that turned the desert into a temporary sea of mud and caused the creek to flood its banks. Owen and Pete worked day and night to protect the cattle and shore up fences, coming home exhausted and soaked through. But Martha always had hot food and warm fires waiting, and Sarah would greet him at the door with enthusiastic hugs that made every hardship worthwhile. Jamie grew rapidly, his tiny features resolving into a face that was a perfect blend of Martha and Owen. He had Martha's green eyes and Owen's dark hair, and a smile that could light up a room. By his first birthday in August, he was toddling around getting into everything, with Sarah acting as his devoted guardian and playmate. The ranch prospered as well. Owen's careful management and fair dealings had earned him a solid reputation, and he was able to sell his cattle at good prices. He invested in improvements, in better breeding stock, in a new barn and more fencing. The ranch that had been just a living was becoming something substantial, something that could support a large family and be passed down through generations. On the second anniversary of their wedding, Owen took Martha into Tucson for a rare overnight trip, leaving the children with Mrs. Chen. They stayed in a hotel, ate dinner at a restaurant, and walked the streets like courting youngsters. It felt like a stolen moment out of time, precious and rare. "Happy anniversary," Owen said as they stood on the hotel balcony looking out at the lights of the town. 2 years, Martha mused. Sometimes it feels like forever and sometimes like just yesterday. "Any regrets?" Martha turned to him, her expression soft. "Not a single one." "You saved me, Owen. You and this life we have built together. I was so lost when the fire took everything, and then you were there. You held Sarah and told me I still had people who cared. You gave me hope when I had none left." "You saved me right back," Owen said, pulling her into his arms. "I was just going through the motions before you came. Now I have a reason for everything, a purpose beyond just survival." They kissed under the stars, and Martha whispered against his lips, "I'm pregnant again." Owen jerked back, searching her face. "Really? Already?" "Already," Martha confirmed, laughing at his expression. "Are you happy, ecstatic?" Owen breathed and kissed her again, deeper this time. "Absolutely ecstatic." The pregnancy was easier than the first had been, possibly because Martha was less stressed and better nourished. She carried through the winter and into the spring, and in late April, she gave birth to another son. This one they named Thomas, after the reverend who had married them, and he was a quiet, peaceful baby from the start, the opposite of Jamie's exuberant energy. Sarah, now 7 and taking her role as eldest very seriously, appointed herself assistant mother and was constantly checking on both her brothers. Jamie, not quite 2, was less interested in the new baby and more interested in following Owen and Pete around, his chubby legs pumping as he tried to keep up. Owen looked at his growing family with a sense of profound gratitude. 4 years ago, he had been alone except for Pete, his house empty and his future uncertain. Now it overflowed with life and noise and love, and he could not imagine it any other way. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of children growing. Sarah learned to read and write under Martha's patient instruction, and proved to have a quick mind and a love of books that delighted both her parents. Jamie grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who was fearless around the animals and constantly giving his parents heart attacks with his antics. Thomas was the thoughtful one, content to sit and watch and absorb everything around him with solemn eyes. When Sarah was 10 and beginning to look more like a young lady than a little girl, Martha gave birth to their 4th child, a daughter they named Emma. Sarah was overjoyed to finally have a sister, and Emma became her particular charge, with the older girl spending hours playing with the baby and helping care for her. The ranch continued to expand and prosper. Owen took on a full-time crew of hands as the herd grew, and the house was expanded again to accommodate the growing family. They built a proper schoolroom in town with several other families, pooling resources to hire a teacher, though Martha still supplemented the children's education at home. Owen's hair started to show threads of silver at the temples, and Martha noticed fine lines around his eyes, but he was still strong and vital, throwing himself into his work with undiminished energy. Martha herself had settled into her role as ranch wife and mother with a contentment she had never dreamed possible after Richard's death, and the fire that had taken everything. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch was peaceful, Owen and Martha would sit on the porch as they had on that first night when everything changed. They would hold hands and talk about the day, about the children, about plans for the future. And always, Owen would think back to that night when he had ridden toward a fire and found his whole future waiting in the smoke and chaos. "Do you ever think about that night?" Martha asked once, as if reading his thoughts. "The night of the fire, all the time," Owen admitted. "Best night of my life, even though it was your worst." "It wasn't my worst," Martha said slowly. "Losing Richard was my worst. The fire was terrible, but it led me to you, and I wouldn't trade what we have for anything." They sat in comfortable silence, and Owen thought about the words he had spoken to Martha that night, words that had come from somewhere deep and instinctive. "You still have us." He had meant the community, the townspeople, but the words had become prophetic in ways he never could have imagined. Martha and Sarah had become his us, his we, his family, and he had become theirs in return. When Sarah turned 18, a young rancher's son named David began courting her with Owen's grudging permission. Martha teased her husband about his protectiveness, but she understood. Sarah was their first, the little girl Owen had held while her world burned, and letting her grow up was painful even as it was necessary. The courtship was proper and sweet, and after a year, David asked for Sarah's hand. The wedding was held at the ranch, a much larger affair than Owen and Martha's had been, with what seemed like half the territory in attendance. Martha cried throughout the ceremony, and Owen stood stiff and proud, though his own eyes were suspiciously bright. After Sarah moved to her new husband's ranch 15 miles away, the house felt oddly empty despite still having 3 children at home. But Sarah visited often, and within 2 years, she made Owen and Martha grandparents with the birth of a little girl she named Martha, after her mother. Jamie grew into a talented horseman who wanted nothing more than to work the ranch alongside his father. Owen taught him everything he knew, and by the time Jamie was 20, he was as capable as any hand Owen had ever hired. Thomas, meanwhile, showed an aptitude for numbers and business that surprised everyone, and Owen began turning over more of the ranch's financial management to him. Emma proved to be a gifted artist, filling notebook after notebook with sketches of the desert landscape, the animals, her family. Martha encouraged her talent, and when Emma was 15, they arranged for her to take lessons from an artist in Tucson, making the trip once a month. And through it all, Owen and Martha remained the steady center, their love deepening with every passing year. They had weathered droughts and floods, illness and injury, the normal sorrows and joys of life. But they had weathered it together, and that made all the difference. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party at the ranch. Sarah came with her husband and 3 children, and the house rang with laughter and music and love. Late in the evening, after the guests had departed and the grandchildren had been put to bed, Owen and Martha slipped away to the porch, to their spot, to their ritual. 20 years, Martha said wonderingly. "How is that possible?" "Because we were lucky," Owen replied. "Because we found each other in the fire and held on." "You held Sarah," Martha corrected softly. "You told me I still had people. You gave me hope." "And you gave me everything," Owen said, turning to face her. The moonlight silvered her hair, which was now more gray than brown, and highlighted the lines on her face. But to Owen, she was as beautiful as she had been that first night, standing in the firelight with her world in ashes around her. "You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to build something that would last. We built it together," Martha said, taking his hands. "Everything we have we made together, you and me." They kissed soft and sweet, a kiss of deep partnership and abiding love. In the house behind them, their children and grandchildren slept safely. Around them, the ranch spread out into the darkness, solid and prosperous, a testament to hard work and faith. Above them, the stars wheeled in their eternal patterns, watching over the desert as they had for millennia. "Tell me again," Martha whispered against Owen's lips. "Tell me what you said that night." Owen smiled, knowing exactly what she meant. He had said it 1,000 times over the years, but it never got old. "You still have us," he murmured. "You've always had us, and you always will." "Always," Martha agreed, and they stood together in the moonlight, two souls that had found each other in chaos and built something beautiful from the ashes. The years continued their inexorable march, but Owen and Martha faced them as they had faced everything, together. When Jamie married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch, they celebrated. When Thomas announced he wanted to go to Denver to study business, they supported him despite missing him terribly. When Emma sold her first painting for an amount that made everyone's eyes widen, they framed the check before she could cash it, wanting to preserve the moment. More grandchildren came, each one a blessing, each one carrying forward the legacy that Owen and Martha had built. The ranch passed bit by bit into Jamie's capable hands, with Owen stepping back to an advisory role and finding he enjoyed the slower pace. He and Martha took to going on long rides together, exploring the desert they had called home for so long, sometimes bringing a grandchild along to teach them the ways of the land. On their 30th anniversary, the family gathered again, and this time there were so many people that they had to hold the celebration outside under a vast tent. Owen stood and gave a toast, his voice still strong despite his 62 years. 30 years ago, I rode toward a fire and found my future, he said, looking at Martha with eyes full of love. I found a woman who was brave and strong and beautiful, even in her darkest moment. I found a little girl who needed someone to tell her it would be all right. And I found out who I really was, which was a man who needed them just as much as they needed me. He raised his glass higher. To Martha, my wife, my partner, my heart, thank you for saying yes. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for every single day. To Martha and Owen. The crowd echoed and the celebration continued long into the night. When everyone had finally gone and the house was quiet, Owen and Martha lay in their bed, holding hands in the darkness. "No regrets?" Owen asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. "Not one," Martha replied, as she always did. "You gave me everything, Owen. A home, a family, a love I thought I'd never find again." "You gave me the same," Owen said, "and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat." They drifted off to sleep like that, hands intertwined, hearts beating in sync, two people who had found each other in fire and built something that would last forever. The fire had taken Martha's home that long ago September night in 1878. But Owen had been there to catch her when she fell, to hold her daughter and tell her she was not alone. He had given her a new home, a new family, a new life full of love and possibility. And in return, she had given him everything he had never known he was searching for. Years later, when their children told the story to their own children, they would speak of that night as the beginning of everything. The night the fire took the store but gave them all each other. The night a cowboy rode in from the darkness and changed the course of so many lives with simple kindness and an open heart. And always, the story would end the same way, with the words that had started it all. The words that had become a promise and a prophecy and a testament to love's enduring power. "You still have us." Owen and Martha lived out their days surrounded by the family they had built, secure in the knowledge that what they had created would endure long after they were gone. The ranch continued to prosper under Jamie's management, with Thomas handling the business side from his office in Tucson and Emma documenting everything in her art. Sarah's children grew and had children of their own, and the family tree spread wide and deep, roots firmly planted in the Arizona desert. When Owen passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75, Martha grieved but did not break. She had loved him for 43 years, and that love had shaped her into someone strong enough to face even this final loss. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling stories of the cowboy who had ridden toward a fire and saved her. When she finally joined Owen, it was with a smile on her face, and her family buried them side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the vast Arizona sky they had both loved so much. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates, but the family added one more line at the bottom of each on Owen's. He gave us everything on Martha's. She was loved. And the ranch continued on, generation after generation, a living testament to what two people could build when they found each other in the darkest moment and chose to face the future together. The fire had taken her home. The cowboy had held her child and told her she still had family, still had hope, still had a future. And from those ashes, they had built something that would last forever. A love that transcended tragedy, a family that spanned generations, and a legacy that would endure as long as the desert itself. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the years. A story of love found in unlikely places, of strength born from adversity, of two souls finding each other exactly when they needed to most. And it all started with a fire, a cowboy, and 5 simple words that changed everything. You still have us.